Greetings. Welcome to today's webinar, Get Savvy with Investing, Common Pitfalls and Traps. This webinar is jointly organized by Law Society Pro Bono Services and the Financial Industry Disputes Resolution Center, also known as FIDReC. I'm your host, and my name is Serene. First, some housekeeping matters. Please feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A function. We will do our best to address your questions during or at the end of the talk. The handouts for today's talk will be emailed to you later this week. However, do note that today's discussion and the handouts are not intended to substitute any form of professional legal advice. If you require specific legal advice, please consult a lawyer. With that, our speakers for today are Ms Eunice Chua and Mr Francis Goh. Eunice is the Chief Executive Officer of FIDReC. She was previously an Assistant Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University School of Law and Deputy CEO of the Singapore International Mediation Centre. Eunice has served as Assistant Registrar of the Supreme Court and Magistrate of the State Courts. Francis is a partner at Harry Elias Partnership, Singapore. He is an internationally certified mediator and dispute resolution specialist. He draws on his 30 years of experience in legal practice to guide individuals and businesses in their legal matters. He serves as mediator at Singapore Mediation Centre and Singapore International Mediation Centre. He is also an adjudicator at FIDReC. Thank you, Eunice and Francis, for joining us today. Before we start, for some of the audience members, this may be the first time that they have heard of FIDReC. Eunice, could you share about FIDReC and what does it do?
Thanks, Serene. Let me explain about FIDReC to those who may not be so familiar with us. FIDReC was officially launched in August 2005, so we've been around for more than 15 years now. We are a designated dispute resolution scheme, which means that under the regulations by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, all financial institutions who have a retail license, meaning they will sell products to ordinary consumers like you and me, they must become a subscriber to FIDReC. So this will allow consumers who have disputes with those financial institutions somewhere to turn to if they cannot resolve those disputes on their own. So what FIDReC does is we will specialize in handling these disputes against financial institutions, and we try to resolve them through two processes, mediation and adjudication. So mediation is the word you heard Serene use quite a lot in our introductions earlier. It is a process where you have a neutral person, such as our FIDReC mediator or case manager, try and facilitate discussions between the financial institution and the consumer to see if there can be a resolution, some kind of settlement or some kind of closure to the case. But if there is no settlement, then FIDReC will offer the consumer a chance to go to adjudication, which is a more formal process where you have an adjudicator, someone like Francis, very well experienced and knowledgeable, who will hear the submissions of the consumer and the financial institution before deciding whether the consumer has a claim. But before all this starts, one of the first questions we ask consumers is whether they have tried to go to their financial institution first. And this is because if you skip that and you come straight to FIDReC, that might take you, a more indirect route at getting to where you want to go. So we do give the financial institutions a chance first to try and resolve their dispute with the consumer before we will take in a complaint. And on the next slide, you will see the mission of FIDReC. Many people ask us whether we are part of the Monetary Authority of Singapore or part of the government. We are not. What we are an independent alternative dispute resolution center. So much like the Singapore Mediation Centre or the Singapore International Mediation Centre, we are a company limited by guarantee. And our role is really to promote amicable and fair resolution. On the next slide, you will see that I have summarized the FIDReC process, and we will also be sharing some brochures and materials as handouts at the end of this webinar. You will see QR codes appearing on the slide later on, which you will be able to scan and access all these resources. So I think the most important thing I would want to highlight here is that it is no cost at all. It is free to file a dispute at FIDReC. So we were able to help you with mediation without any cost to the consumer. We will first look at the case to check whether it is within our jurisdiction. So as a designated dispute resolution scheme, we have a set of terms of reference, which the Monetary Authority of Singapore and our board has approved, which sets out the kinds of cases that we can or cannot handle. So for example, if you are not an individual or a sole proprietor, but it is a company, FIDReC cannot handle such a case. Another example is if the court has already made a decision on that matter, then FIDReC will not be able to handle as well. But if FIDReC can handle the complaint, we will progress the case to mediation, where the case manager can, through various means, whether on the phone, through email, at a meeting, online or in person, check in with both parties, find out more information from them, and see whether there is a way to resolve the dispute. If not, then, as I mentioned earlier, there is this chance to have an expert like Francis give their view on whether or not you have a valid claim as a consumer. There is a limit of $100,000 per claim at this stage, and there is a small fee of $50 per claim plus GST. And this is just to make sure that consumers are fully aware of the commitment they take when they go to adjudication, because they do have to prepare submissions and present their case to the adjudicator. And after the adjudicator hears all the submissions, there's also a chance for parties to ask each other questions as well, but not so much like a court setting, right? More informal. Everybody is representing themselves. So no lawyers, no external lawyers are involved, which makes our process cost-effective and affordable. And finally, another important point to note is that the decision of the adjudicator does not bind the consumer, it only binds the financial institution. So this means that for the consumer, even if you're not satisfied with the outcome at FIDReC, this is no loss or no harm to you. You can still choose, if you so wish, to go to court or other avenues to pursue your claim. So that is the FIDReC's role in a nutshell. Maybe
Thanks,
quite a big nut.
Thanks, Eunice. I think that was a very good overview. And I think it's good to know that there's this very affordable alternative that consumers can turn to. But as you say, before any consumer turns to FIDReC, they have to first try to at least speak to the financial institution first. Eunice, given today's topic, what are the trends that you've observed at FIDReC about consumers facing issues with online investments?
I think one main motivation for us to work on this talk with the Law Society Pro Bono Services is this trend that you see right before you of red bars getting taller and taller. And these represent the complaints at FIDReC that relate to investment issues. And so we would like to take this opportunity together with Francis and with Serene's help to try and address some common scenarios and issues so that I think we want to prevent disputes from arising if possible. But in the event that you do face certain situations, you will have a better understanding of what are the considerations involved.
Thanks, Eunice. Yes, so let's walk through some case scenarios, because there's nothing like going through some real life or similar or something that might happen in real life to see how things might play out. And as you said, prevention is sometimes better than cure. So our first scenario deals with an online trading platform. 88 Trades is an online investment brokerage. Its social media advertisements touts its customers' testimonies that 88 Trades is their secret to huge profits, and there is a free bonus on account opening. Ella signs up and funds her purchases with her credit card. When Ella tries to withdraw from her account, 88 Trades tells her there is a high surrender charge for withdrawals before 10 years. Ella asks the bank which is a credit card issuer, for help, as this term was not flagged to her when she had signed up. The bank said that it is unable to apply for chargeback because the transaction was authorized by Ella and authenticated by OTP. Ella approaches FIDReC. Let's first try to understand what the bank means by this response. Sounds rather cryptic, OTP, chargeback. So Francis, what does the bank mean by chargeback?
Yeah, that's a great question. As more and more people, the man in the street, what they call retail investors, try to find ways to invest their money, they are going to be attracted to a scenario just like what we see here. And they are going to be faced with a lot of unfamiliar terms, unfamiliar phrases. So chargeback is one interesting term. In layman terms, it is a refund to your credit card. How does this refund take place? It is initiated after a consumer like Ella has successfully disputed the transaction. So a dispute must be recognized by this bank process, all right? A dispute may be a fraudulent transaction, an unauthorized transaction, or say disputes over non-delivery or quality. If the complaint is successful, then a chargeback, a refund will be done.
Thanks, Francis. So what's the significance of the OTP? What did the bank mean when they said that the transaction was authorized by Ella and authenticated by OTP?
All right. This is something I think our audience need to understand. The OTP is a 6-digit number that you would see transmitted to your handphone when you use your credit card to make any transaction. So most of you will not think twice. You just key in the number because you want to carry on with the transaction. The significance of this is that as far as the bank is concerned, as far as the merchant is concerned, as far as the card issuer is concerned, this is a secured transaction. By keying in the OTP, which was sent to your handphone, it's deemed that it is personal information to you, known only to you. You will see that they would say, don't share this OTP with anyone else, all right? And when you key that in, it is considered as your authorization to carry out this trade. And in future, should you raise a dispute that you were defrauded, or that you didn't know about the transaction, or that it was unauthorized, the bank would trot out this OTP and say, oh, it was a secured transaction. And then you as a consumer will have to explain away how come, all right, this OTP was used if you claim it was fraudulent or unauthorized.
Thanks, Francis. So it sounds like in this situation, Ella did authenticate, she did key in the OTP because it's not a situation of fraud or someone taking her identity. What do you think Ella should do in this situation?
Okay, let's look at the fact scenario here. Ella wanted to purchase, wanted to invest. She was lured by these terms that there's a great bonus that will be given to her on sign up. So it appeared that she wanted this product, or she wanted to participate, and she used her credit card. An OTP must have been sent to her, and she happily keys it in, all right, to proceed with the transaction. Now, if Ella were to recall, before she got to the payment page, she would have had to click on a page that says, I accept the terms and conditions of whatever transaction it is she's doing. And most of us, myself included sometimes, very irresponsibly click, I accept, without even bothering to read these transactions because we just want to do the deal. That is a very, very dangerous thing. All right, it will be fine if you're buying a pair of running shoes and you click I accept on the terms. But in this case, she is investing in a financial product Ella owes it to herself to click on the terms, read, and find out what they are. And if she's in any doubt whatsoever, all right, she should pause and she should seek proper advice before proceeding with her trade.
Thanks, Francis. I think it's such a useful and good reminder to, before you click accept, especially when you're doing big transactions and big money, do take that time to read through the terms and conditions, as long as it may be. Well, I know that 88 Trades is an online investment brokerage. It may not even be based in Singapore. Is there any difference whether 88 Trades is based in Singapore or is a foreign company?
Well, yes, it makes a big difference, but let's backtrack a little bit. All right. Most of the time, when you are investing or when you are making any transactions, you must remember that you are not dealing with a person. Even though there may be a sales representative that is sweet talking you into the deal, or even if there's some friend that comes and says, I've got this great, opportunity, invest with me. But when he actually tells you to part with his money, you're actually parting to a corporate entity that he may have set up or that the salesman is representing. There's this difference in what we call in law, the company is a separate legal personality from the person. And so you should inquire, what is this company? What assets does it have? Where is it based? All right, because if you're going against a company and it's an empty company registered with just $2 share capital, you are basically parting your hard-earned money into this shell entity. And if something goes wrong, you may not get your money back. Now, local company, hard enough to chase. What happens if this company is based overseas and it's so easy to have an online trading platform from, Cyprus or some Labuan or some other place, that's out of our jurisdiction. If a dispute happens and you really wanted to quarrel with them over their product or whatever, you would have to pursue them into that jurisdiction. All right, hard to do in normal times, even harder to do if you are being scammed, because they are all out to get you. All right, a good way is that this company is investment. It is likely to be carrying out financial activity in Singapore. Check whether they are regulated with the MAS. All right, that is something, a good self-help that they can follow up with. Ella should have done that.
Thanks, Francis. It is a lot more difficult to, as you said, seek remedies or chase after a company that's not even in Singapore, especially if they're based in an unknown jurisdiction or country outside of Singapore. If you're dealing with a Singapore company, it's good to check whether they're licensed under MAS. Now, an audience member has a little bit of confusion or would like some clarity about chargeback versus requesting for withdrawal. So I think what this audience member is thinking is that here Ella is asking to withdraw from the account. And yet on the other hand, when she's asking the bank for help, the bank is saying, look, you can't apply for a chargeback. So perhaps you could explain a bit more about what's the difference between Ella asking for withdrawal from her account versus her asking for a chargeback from the bank.
Okay, you have to separate the two transactions. All right. As far as the initial deposit into this investment company is concerned, Ella would have used her credit card, for example, and then there would have been a bank that issued her that credit card that helped to facilitate this transaction and the money went out. All right. So that is the transaction and the parties involved in a chargeback, where if she is saying, I dispute the transaction, it's unauthorized or not to my expectation. Bank, I want you to help me have a dispute process and then effect a refund once that is successful. All right, that's one category. When you're talking about the withdrawal, Ella has invested into this platform and she wants to withdraw her own money. It's like, for want of a better word, like as if she has an account with them and she now wants to take the money out from the account. That would be governed by the company's terms and conditions, which is why it's so important for her to have read those terms before she clicked I accept. Just hearing this is a great investment, can make a lot of money, and if you sign up, I get a whole great bonus, is only half the story. How do you get your money back? All right. And that would be buried inside some of their terms, and which is what they are probably doing now, waiving those terms and conditions to her. Oh, you can only withdraw if you have a huge surrender value. All right. And Ella will have to live by those terms because that was the parameters on which she transacted upon.
Thanks, Francis, for the explanation. It's important to remember when it's a good deal, not only how do you get in, but how do you get out? And that's unfortunately the situation that Ella is dealing with. Eunice, how does FIDReC come into the picture? Does FIDReC come in because it's a local bank for the credit card? Or does FIDReC come in when it's even with a foreign entity like 88 Trades?
Thanks, Serene. FIDReC comes in when there is a local financial institution that is licensed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And in this scenario, we come in because Ella, maybe because she's unable to get back her money from 88 Trade, she does the next best thing to see whether she can get the bank who has issued her credit card to refund her on the credit card. So that is where FIDReC would come in. And to check whether or not a financial institution you are dealing with is actually a FIDReC subscriber and will allow you to come to FIDReC to seek help when you have a dispute, there is a list on our website of all the subscribers of FIDReC. They can be banks, they can be insurers, they can also be investment firms. So there is a list on our website to check. There is also a list on the Monetary Authority of Singapore website that is called the Financial Institutions Directory. And there you can also see from an official source whether or not a company is actually licensed by the MAS. Occasionally, we do receive complaints from consumers who have been scammed, or they have had something like 88 Trades, an offshore online brokerage. They have a dispute with them and they try to come to us because maybe they are Singaporeans, right? Or they have heard of us from somewhere. But because that company is not regulated by MAS, there is nothing FIDReC can do to help them to reach out to that company because we are not, we don't have any investigation powers or any ability beyond what you as a normal individual could do. Yeah.
Thanks, Eunice. So do you have anything to add to what Francis has described in terms of what Ella can do in this situation?
Yes. So I think in this situation, Ella has maybe done the right thing. She has first tried to go to the bank to see whether she can resolve it with the bank. And when the bank doesn't give her a satisfactory response, she comes to FIDReC. And this is something that all consumers can use. We are here for you to use if there is an unsatisfactory response from your bank or your financial institution. When the case comes to FIDReC, what we will do is to look at it. Right here, Ella meets the basic criteria. She is an individual, so her complaint is, we will assume, is against a local bank who is licensed by the MAS. And we will also assume that she has come to FIDReC in a timely manner. It has not been more than 6 months since the bank has given her a final reply. So with these, FIDReC will be able to take on this case and we will look at it. We will ask the bank to give us an investigation report. And this is a chance for the bank, to explain and to respond to Ella's complaint. So for example, Ella might say that she expected, maybe, Francis, that one reason people do ask for chargeback is non-delivery of product or product not of satisfactory quality. So maybe she's trying to say that because she did not intend, to be bound by those terms and conditions. She would like to try and reverse the transaction. From FIDReC's perspective, as a neutral party, we will be asking Ella, so when she entered into this transaction, did she read through? Did she actually click to accept the terms and conditions? Was there any fraud? Did she key in the OTP? We will try and find out all this from Ella. And from the bank's response, we will also try and understand whether the bank had indeed assisted Ella to try to apply for a chargeback. So as Francis explained, this chargeback is a dispute that the bank raises on behalf of the customer to the card issuer. So this would be Visa or MasterCard, for example. So Visa and MasterCard, they have their own chargeback rules, which will allow banks who issue cards on their behalf to go to them, the card association, to ask for a chargeback. So a common, term in both Visa and MasterCard's chargeback guidelines is that they don't permit chargebacks for authorized secured transactions, like Francis explained, because the OTP is like your signature, it's like a key to your house. It is only something that is supposed to belong to you. And so it is quite common that this chargeback process will fail because in truth, it is outside the bank's control. It's governed by the card association's rules. So what FIDReC will do in this situation is we will try and help to explain to Ella then, what the role of the bank is in this kind of situation. As a credit card issuer, the bank's responsibility is actually to pay out, right? When we as consumers want to use our card and we authorize transactions, we expect the bank to pay out. And if later on it turns out that the transaction is not as we had wanted, for whatever reason, and we try to get our money back, the bank may not be able to get that charge back, because its role is not to investigate on behalf of the customer. Its role as a credit card issuer is really to facilitate the payment, as and when the customer has instructed it. So perhaps Ella may be satisfied with this explanation. If it is helpful, we will also set up a meeting between Ella and the bank representative. So the bank representative can also explain and FIDReC can help to ask whether the bank, is willing to make any goodwill offer to Ella. But if this doesn't result in any settlement, then Ella will have a chance to go to adjudication. But as Francis said, through the mediation process, Ella would have gathered quite a lot of information. And in this situation where, she's not a victim of fraud and she has perhaps indeed authorized this transaction, she may or may not choose to go along with the adjudication. And so FIDReC's role here is, mediation can sometimes result in a settlement, but can also be a process where consumers can find out more and understand the terms better, what exactly has happened and what options they have and what chances they have.
Thanks, Eunice. It sounds like FIDReC does serve a very useful role in trying to educate the consumer as well as to be the bridge between the financial institution and the consumer. So I pause here. Speaking of handouts, there is a QR code on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. So if you use that QR code, you're able to download the handouts. So let's move to our next scenario. Our next scenario is on cryptocurrency. A gentle reminder to the audience that if you have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A button. So on to our scenario. Fred hears from his friend about his success in cryptocurrency through RedHub. Fred follows suit and transfers money to RedHub via telegraphic transfer. Fred reads in the news that RedHub is a scam. He calls the bank to get his money back. Frank argues that the bank should have known RedHub is a scam and blocked the transfer. Fred approaches FIDReC. So Francis, to audience members who may not be familiar with cryptocurrencies, are you able to give a very short explanation of what is cryptocurrency?
Okay, I'll attempt to do so. All right, it's actually a really huge topic. And, you know, if you are going to invest in cryptocurrency, I really encourage you to read up about it and not just go on the recommendation of your friend. All right. This is what we typically see. It's called herd mentality. Friend A says this is great. Friend B just follows blindly. All right. In a subject like cryptocurrency, that is a recipe for your disaster in this investment. All right. Okay, so cryptocurrency is a form of digital asset. If you really want to think about it, it is not an asset like a gold bar or a cup, something tangible. It is really a string of numbers, okay, that identify this unique transaction, because this digital asset resides on a network of computers, all right? And it's distributed across a large network of computers that use an encryption system to keep their system secure. And that is where you get the word crypto from, encryption, all right? And then when you trade on this platform, all right, they are using a technology called blockchain to create a virtual ledger. So it is like an accounting process, but you don't have a real book. This book just exists on the internet. And what you are doing is you have a wallet. It's not a physical wallet. It is just an email account with a password, all right? And you have to remember this password in order to access your transactions. So what do? People are able to trade on this network, all right, using their wallet, and they exchange something called virtual tokens, all right? Now, here is the attraction of cryptocurrency. Whoever were the creators of this currency, they created a limited amount of tokens. And then they send it out into the market and they say you can use these tokens for exchanging for things that you want. All right, so it becomes like a medium of exchange. Just like our dollar notes or our real currency, there is a value assigned to it. But because they can control the amount of cryptocurrency, they created it after all, there's scarcity. And when a lot of people want a scarce product, the price goes up. And they're playing around with this scarcity, this demand, and with people wanting to use this, for example, Bitcoin, which is the most popular cryptocurrency around these days, to do their transactions. All right, so it's a really, for want of a better word, it's an artificial world. It's a virtual world. It is not even a real tangible asset. So for consumers, I'd advise you that if you are just buying cryptocurrency, you are just speculating, you're not investing. All right, for those who really want to learn about cryptocurrency and its uses, go and study into it. There is a lot to learn before you are able to say that you are a savvy investor in this area of cryptocurrency. All right, back to you.
Thanks, Francis. I mean, thank you. It is a complicated subject, so thank you for trying to simplify it and to explain in such a short period of time. And it does sound pretty complex, so it's something which I think you know, most consumers need to educate themselves before they try to even go into the market,
Yes.
because as you said, it's very much dependent on the person who created the cryptocurrency, whether they would flood the market with more or with less, who knows? That's not really within your control. You know, you made a reference to currency. So what's the difference between cryptocurrency versus currency like the US dollars, Australia dollars?
Okay. The only commonality, I would say, is that it is a medium of exchange. So if I want to buy a product in the real world, I would use my physical money. which has a value assigned to it. So cryptocurrency in the virtual world tries to copy this attribute. They assign a certain value to the Bitcoin or to the cryptocurrency that they have. And with that value, you are able to do transactions using the virtual tokens. So you deduct tokens when you are purchasing things, or when you accumulate tokens, you are buying tokens back into your wallet. All right, so the commonality is in the fact that it can be used as a medium of exchange, but in terms of how tangible the cryptocurrency is, I would say that it is hardly as tangible as your gold bar or your US dollar that you are investing in the real world.
Thanks, Francis. So very important reminder to everyone, cryptocurrency, despite its name, is not the same as your usual currency like the US dollars or Australia dollars, which I think we're all more familiar with. So given this situation, what should Fred do when he realized he has been scammed?
Well, I think his best bet would be to go to the police, all right, make a police report. And I think if there are enough critical mass of people who have been scammed, then the police would likely take action. Let me preempt maybe another question. Fred, in this case, has gone to the bank and said they should have known that they were a scam. Well, to latch on to something that Eunice said earlier, the bank is just a payment facilitator. The bank is, in fact, you're just the bank's customer. They don't owe any duty to you, all right, to be watching out for you, whether you've been responsible in your investment. The bank is not expected to do that. They're just expected to execute the transaction. So from what I understand, if there is a clear blacklist, if Red Hat or Red Hub in this case has already been on the blacklist of the bank, they would likely stop the transaction. But in this case here, it seems like, Red Hub flew under the radar. They were scamming people and they hadn't been caught out yet. And so, basically Fred was one of the unlucky ones who invested before Red Hub got identified as a scam and became on the blacklist.
Thanks, Francis. I think it's a good reminder of the role of the bank. The bank, as you said, is meant to help the consumer transfer his monies as instructed. And as you said, it's a little bit of a compromise. If your bank investigates or look into what you do, that kind of ties your hands, and you may not be very happy that someone's stopping you from using your own money, I imagine, if the shoe's on another foot, So Eunice, how do you think FIDReC would handle such a complaint?
Well, we assume that the complaint has gone through the usual checks and we take it in. The first step at mediation is for us to find out more. So we will be asking Fred whether or not, when he found out that Red Hub was a scam, how he found out. When did he make this telegraphic transfer, right? And what did the bank do to assist him after that, right? And with the bank, we will also ask for their investigation report to find out from their perspective, right? What was the status of Red Hub? Like Francis said, was it on, any identified scam alert list? We will also find out from the bank, the steps it took once Fred had notified them there was this scam. Did it try to recover, on the best efforts basis, right? As Francis said, there is no guarantee. The bank is not an investigator either. They have a limited abilities. As Francis said, it is the police who would investigate these kinds of scam and fraud cases. But there have been situations where perhaps, the bank officer has managed to help recover some money. We do see that in the newspaper, right? Recently, many bank employees have been commended for their efforts in spotting scams. But that is also a bit different from saying the bank has a duty or has an obligation to the consumer to spot the scam. And at mediation of this kind of cases, this is often what we will discuss with both parties. What is the bank's role? What can Fred expect of the bank? And if the bank is unable to recover, is there any fault on the part of the bank? Has it tried its best effort, right? If FIDReC is, not a Singapore company, it's outside of Singapore, it might be even harder to have any expectation that the bank can recover, because after all, this is a telegraphic transfer, which in many cases we understand from banks is what they call a straight-through process, meaning that once the instruction is given and authorized, the instruction flows straight through. There is no kind of a human check at some point that says confirm, right? So that makes recovery difficult. Although in our modern banking world, it makes transactions happen very easily and quickly. So with convenience, it does come with some risks as well. So in this sort of situation, at mediation, we will try and explore all these facts with both parties to see whether Frank, in the end, he thinks that it is worthwhile to continue with adjudication, right? Perhaps if the situation is such that FIDReC is actually on, scamalerts.sg, it was actually a known scam, right? But somehow it slips through detection, then perhaps the bank might think that, there is some basis for it to make some offer to Fred, right? Perhaps they could share in this liability. After all, both parties are victims here, right? It's not as if the bank is party to this scam, right? The scammer is somewhere else, right? With all this money, both Fred and the bank are actually innocent in this kind of situation. So we try to see whether any possibility of maybe sharing liability in some situations. But sometimes when the banks think that the customer has, actually been careless themselves, right? So in this situation, Fred had just accepted his friend's recommendation and he knowingly made this transfer. Maybe the bank will take the position that they don't want to make any offer. And such is mediation. We cannot force the bank to make an offer or force the consumer to accept an offer. It is our role to try and bring facts to the attention of both parties, ask questions to prompt the parties to think, suggest possible options that they can consider. But if in the end, Fred and the bank, cannot come to an agreement, then again, what we do with Ella, we will do with Fred. We will offer Fred the chance to go to adjudication, to put together his strongest case and try and persuade, an adjudicator like Francis that indeed, with knowing the law, the contract terms, the role of the bank, whether or not the customer here has any valid claim. Yeah.
Thanks, Eunice. I think one thing you said struck me, I guess, deeply, which is that it's not a situation where the bank came up with the fraud or with the scam. At the end of the day, it's just an intermediary to help facilitate payments and transfer of monies. So, it does raise a question that, ultimately it's not as if the bank was the one who perpetuated this fraud. It's actually more of FIDReC. And the question, of course, is where should the responsibility lie in, falling into this scam? So you did make a reference to an interesting website, which I didn't know existed. So it's good that you mentioned it. So do you have any tips on how to avoid investment scams?
I think another very useful resource, apart from scamalerts.sg, is moneysense.gov.sg, which is an initiative supported by the Monetary Authority of Singapore to provide educational materials to all of us to help us to understand various aspects of money, right? And MoneySense recommendation is always to ask, check, and confirm, ACC. So when someone first recommends, an investment opportunity to you, ask more about it. As Francis says, this is a company, so find out who is the CEO, how much money does this company have? Where is this company based, right? Who runs the company? Who are the key executives? Are they persons, real persons? Can you find out about them on the internet? Or is there no information available? These would be red flags, right? The next D is to check. Yeah. So if someone tells you, oh, I have made a lot of money, with this cryptocurrency investment, check. Is it true, right? Is it just a paper profit? Has this person actually managed to take out the money and benefit from it? So always check. And last of all is to confirm, right? So double check against independent sources to confirm. So if, for example, Red Hub pretends to be licensed by MAS, confirm this with the MAS Financial Institutions Directory, as well as the MAS Investor Alert List, right? So MAS also has an Investor Alert List that will tell consumers of companies that have often been mistaken as being licensed by MAS, but are in fact not, right? And in those situations, MAS puts them on this Investor Alert List. So I think with these kinds of investments, and particularly for cryptocurrency, it's very important to go through these steps of ask, check, and confirm. Because as Francis says, there is essentially very speculative. It is possible to lose every cent that you put in this kind of currency. And actually, it's common knowledge that these virtual tokens and currencies could also be, how anti-terrorist financing and money laundering takes place, right? So just be very, very careful with this. Yeah.
Thanks, Eunice. So I think it's good for us, and myself included, to know that there are resources out there. You mentioned there was that MAS site that does alert you to potential scams, and also you can double check if the institution is licensed or regulated by MAS. And I suppose, Eunice, naturally, if they are licensed or regulated, they do have a certain code of conduct in terms of how they carry out the investments. So let's move on to our next scenario, which deals with margin trading with options. Greg reads an opinion piece by a regulated financial institution called BEAR FI in its weekly newsletter that bull options are a good buy. Bull options are volatile, but it appears that there might be a big jump in prices. Greg invests in bull options on BEAR FI's investment platform. Market volatility leads to a margin call, and Greg suffers losses. Greg asks BEAR FI for compensation. Greg argues that he relied on the article and that BEAR FI should have monitored the performance of his investments. BEAR FI denies liability as account is not managed and the proper protocol for the margin call has been followed. Greg approaches FIDReC. Francis, to give a bit of context, what are margin calls?
Okay, a lot of people invest in the share market on borrowed money. All right, they don't have that money. And a lot of these, investment houses say, don't worry, we'll extend you credit. You just put in a minimum value of say X dollars. We will extend you the rest of the credit. All right. So when you are making money and it's a bull run, everybody's happy. In situations where you have market volatility and where your share prices may crash, that is where you are going to find that you will have a margin call. In other words, you have a minimum amount that you're supposed to maintain in the account. All right. Your share value has fallen below that. You are required by the company to top up the difference to bring it back to the minimum amount or higher. All right. And that is where people find that they are caught out because they don't have the cash available. They find that they may then have to sell their shares at severely discounted value and incur more losses. All right. So think carefully before you invest with borrowed money. But that is where a margin call can arise in a market crash or bear situation.
Thanks, Francis. So looking at the financial institution's response, what does it mean that the account is not managed?
You see, when you sign up with a investment house or financial institution, you are required to abide by their contract terms. All right, you will have agreed to invest with them according to a certain set of terms, margin that you have to maintain in your account being one of them. All right. Now, most of these are saying that you are only using my investment platform to facilitate trades. I am not your account manager. I am not your advisor, and I am not managing your portfolio for you. All right. Most customers misunderstand that. They either haven't read the terms, or they are speaking to some relationship manager who promises or who expresses that they will help to monitor the account. All right. So that is where disputes can arise. Customers will say they were misled. There was a misrepresentation made. But at the end of the day, we have to examine also what were the terms that they had signed up to. So the allegation here is that, no, we didn't manage your account. We are not assuming responsibilities for all these fluctuations and for alerting you to do so.
Thanks. So what are your thoughts on Greg's situation?
Wow, okay. In the first place, Greg, before going in to trade with this investment institution, needs to check his own financial situation. All right. Has he set aside enough money for a rainy day? The recommendation is 6 months' salary as emergency cash. Has he taken care of his other responsibilities? And with his spare cash, he can then go into these kind of trades. Then he needs to evaluate, is he taking on too much of a margin account? In other words, trading with too much borrowed money, such that he is exposed to market fluctuations and the potential crash, which may push him into a margin call situation. All right. But having said that, who is monitoring his account? If he is investing and it's not a managed account, then somebody must be keeping his eyeball on this investment. All right. So Greg needs to evaluate all that. And if he has no time to monitor his investments, then he may need to seriously reconsider whether investments of this nature are suitable for him. All right. So these are some of the quick tips that come to mind.
Thanks, Francis. I mean, does it make a difference in this situation that he was reading an opinion piece from Bear FI? So it seems maybe in Greg's eyes, look, I read an opinion piece of a weekly newsletter and I followed the opinion, but yet it didn't go through. Surely shouldn't Bear FI have some sort of responsibility?
Okay, this is where the consumer needs to understand the nuances of language. Okay, the word and the financial institution that was helping him invest here is very careful. It's an opinion piece. It is just their view. All right, and they are putting it out there and saying, this is our opinion. If he chooses to rely on it, that's his choice. All right. It would have been different perhaps if, the financial institution said, we had shortlisted 3 different types of shares for you, and these are our recommendation. All right. Now, in that sort of scenario, maybe Greg may have a better argument that these people had no business shortlisting the shares for him if it wasn't a managed account, and they had no business making recommendations to him. You see, but opinion piece here, I think it's pretty much his own choice to invest.
Thanks, Francis. And I think, nowadays there's so much opinion pieces, newsletters, emails. I myself receive quite a number of emails as well from various fund houses or financial advisors in terms of what they think are good picks, of investments, etc. So I think it's a very good reminder that you said that, look, it's just their view, it's your opinion, but ultimately you decide whether you agree with them or disagree with them, and make your own decision when it comes to investments.
The opinion pieces are really to cue the investor or the consumer to ask more questions, do the checking, that Eunice was talking about earlier. So they've recommended ABC company. So you fact check, find out what this company is about, what space is it operating in, what is its trading history for the last 3 years, what does the market say about its financial reporting, and what kind of annual return has it been giving, that kind of information before you just plunge in on a hot tip, or some opinion piece. So I think a lot of responsibility falls on an investor. If you are a serious investor, you would have done your homework.
Thanks, Francis. And I think that's a common thread that is running throughout case scenarios. Whether you hear about great deals through advertisements, or your friend, or you read it somewhere on the internet or a newsletter, you do have to do the checks. Eunice, how does FIDReC tackle such situations?
Well, Serene, I think for these kinds of situations, we often find that the consumer who has lost a lot of money is very emotional. This is their hard-earned money. They did not intend all this to happen. And actually, one of the first things we do is we listen. We hear Greg out, understand how he got into this situation. Was it just this opinion piece that he was relying on? Were there other statements made to him by Bear FI? Did he understand that he was having a margin account? Are the documents in place? Did he sign on documents to indicate that he agreed to be doing this margin trading, right? And if he's buying risky products, did the financial institution do a financial needs analysis with him? Did a representative, assist him in going through the process to understand that he actually knows what he is getting himself into? And this is what we would want to find out from Greg. The customers that come to FIDReC, they actually come from the full range. There are people who are what MAS considers accredited investors. These are very experienced investors who have to pass a test, right, to determine that they are able to invest in certain kinds of products with certain risk levels. But then there are also ordinary people who perhaps are close to retirement or near retirement and are just wanting to grow their retirement income, right? So I think it is important from FIDReC's perspective as the neutral institution to first find out how Greg got himself into this situation and what exactly happened here. And of course, find out this, we will hear from Greg, and we will also find out from the financial institution. The financial institution here, right, the situation tells us that the financial institution says the account is not managed, meaning that, Greg bears the responsibility for making the decision, right? But is it a case where, Greg had given instructions that were not complied with, right? We also have to find out all these situations. And the financial institution, in giving us the investigation report, they will actually interview, all the representatives involved, and they will conduct a full investigation, reviewing all the documents and so on. And here, we will also want to understand whether the FI's statement that the proper protocol for margin call has been followed is indeed correct. We will check against the contract between Greg and Bear FI. Different financial institutions have different standards when it comes to margin call. As Francis says, it is down to a number, a percentage figure that you have to maintain, right? And different financial institutions use different methods to calculate what is the value, right, that they can peg against that percentage that you must maintain in your account. So you do have to understand that part. And it is not always that a financial institution has an obligation to notify you when your account is nearing the margin call. Different financial institutions have different practice also. And this is governed by that contract that you have with that financial institution. So with Bear FI, let's say, perhaps under the contract, they have an obligation, where it is, 10% within the margin call, to give notice in writing, for example. We will try and find out whether that has indeed been done or not. We will ask the site to view the documents and so on. So this kind of situation is actually not is not rare. I mean, it's fairly common that people do suffer investment losses. And at mediation, the goal is not to say, Greg, why you behave like that, right? It's not for the mediator to kind of pronounce on whether Greg is right or wrong. So our role here is really to say, having found out all these facts and recognizing all these facts, is there a way for the financial institution and Greg to be able to move forward, right? Because for the financial institution, they may have other considerations. They may think that they have a long relationship with Greg. They want to maintain him as a customer, or they might have other considerations, like maybe Greg is a very elderly person. Maybe he doesn't read and write English. Maybe there was not an ideal situation. Maybe not all the documentation was in place. In these sorts of situations, there is some room for both parties to see whether they can come to any settlement there. And if not, then there is that next step, as always, the adjudication phase. But I think I have to be very frank with everyone. The success rate for consumers at adjudication over the years has ranged between 8 to 20% of all our cases. So year on year, right? Every year is a little bit different. And of course, it depends on the situation. This is not to say that because you only have, roughly 8 to 20% chance of success, you should not go for adjudication. But this is just to reflect that at adjudication, the considerations are different. The adjudicator will have to look at the law, the regulations of MAS, the contract, whether the financial institution has complied, whether the financial institution has conducted itself, fairly. But it is different at mediation where, we can negotiate a lot more, right? We can think about, perhaps Greg has other relationships with this financial institution. The margin account is just one part of their relationship. Maybe the financial institution can offer Greg a bit of a better offer in some other aspect of their financial relationship. All this we can discuss at mediation. But when you choose to refer to adjudication, all the considerations, become narrower. So this is where we always offer the consumer the choice. It is not compulsory that you put yourself through adjudication, right? Or go through that process. You do have a choice. And at the end, again, the decision will not bind the consumer. The consumer is always free to pursue its own claim. It's the consumer's legal rights, so to speak, are not affected in any way.
Thanks, Eunice. Does it matter whether Greg is a first-time or experienced investor? I mean, is that a relevant factor to consider?
Well, to the extent that if Greg is a very experienced investor, it will be harder for him to argue that, he was misled or he had certain expectation or he was not aware of certain things that might be more difficult for him to persuade the adjudicator. So for example, if he's an accredited investor, right, then there is a certain expectation of an accredited investor, right? You would be, expected to know what's the difference between a managed account and a non-managed account. If Greg were a first-time investor, that also doesn't give him a free pass. It's not as if, your first time, so give chance. It is also not like that, because at adjudication, it is about considering the facts and relevant circumstances. And I think Francis can say more on this, because even first-time investors, if they are careless and they are not able to show that the financial institution has in fact, done something wrong, they would not be able to succeed in their claim as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump in here to reinforce what Eunice is saying. I think as a first level, we encourage all consumers or investors to take responsibility for what they are doing. All right. So if you have to fact check, if you have to ask, if you have to read the terms, please do so. After all, it is your hard-earned money that you are investing. So don't be so quick to just give it away. And then in this case, for example, if you are going to be trading with borrowed money, understand that there is a real risk that you could lose your money and still have to pay back the money you borrowed. So you are, in a sense, doubly worse off, all right, than if you just traded with money that you have. So I've seen so many cases, and I know the human emotion that goes through it. We are all vulnerable, but if you can just pause yourself and think through these tips that you have heard from us tonight, that would be great. And then remember that you have got the option at FIDReC to have mediation, where, as Eunice said, it is about listening. All right, I think that's so important, because very often as a consumer or an investor, you feel you're on the outside looking in. You're the poor small fry, and the bank is the big institution. You may not have that confidence and that communication to help you get all the facts. So FIDReC plays a vital role in the mediation. And if you still want to go ahead with the adjudication, then you know that there is a fair process whereby you can tell your side of the story and get a sense of where you stand. All right. Back to you, Serene.
Thanks, Francis. All right, so we've reached to our Q&A segment, and I'd like to remind our audience that you can still submit your questions in the Q&A function. So the first question that we have received from the audience is that in the process of mediation and adjudication, is it possible for the consumer to appoint a lawyer or someone to accompany him and her in the process?
I'll take this one. At FIDReC, we do not permit external lawyers to represent the parties, whether it is the financial institution or the consumer. This is because it is meant to be a low-cost, affordable scheme, and we do not want parties to be lawyering up, so to speak, and this increases the cost for everyone involved. And you will also notice that for adjudication at FIDReC, there is a limit of $100,000 per claim. So for claims of below this value, and generally at FIDReC, the truth is the median amount is more between $5,000 to $8,000 per claim. At this amount, it is not very cost effective to get a lawyer to represent you in our process. If you do want to have a lawyer represent you in mediation, there are other institutions. So FIDReC, because we are this not-for-profit company and we have to follow these terms of reference, we aren't able to permit lawyers, but there are other mediation institutions and providers, who will allow that. Yeah.
Thanks, Eunice. I think a follow-up question is, I guess for some consumers, they're not used to going for mediation or adjudication. Can they bring someone along for more support?
Yes. So at FIDReC, you can appoint a nominee to assist you. This is usually done for people who, have difficulty following in English. They're not proficient in English. They have a nominee. But our case managers are actually quite flexible. So if you do need someone to come with you for moral support at mediation, depending on the mediator's assessment, right? Because it has to be suitable. The mediator has control over the process, and they want the process to be productive and effective. So they will make the decision there. And if at adjudication, then it will be the adjudicator who will approve the nominee attending. But adjudicators and mediators generally like to hear from the person themselves. So this will allow that person to really be involved, have a voice rather than to speak through someone else, unless they are unable to do so in English.
Thanks, Eunice. Well, another question we had was, so far we've mentioned about consumers approaching FIDReC to resolve disputes between consumers and financial institutions. So this audience member asked, in a reverse situation, can a financial institution approach FIDReC to resolve its disputes with consumers?
No, it can't. It can't. We actually had one or two cases where the consumer brings the claim, right? And then the financial institution tries to say, no, you owe me this much money actually, which will override all this. But we have to say, no. We at FIDReC, we are here to resolve the consumer dispute, so we are unable to assist the financial institution to recover money against consumers. Financial institutions will have to find their own recourse outside FIDReC.
Thanks, Eunice. So another audience member had a question about investments and the role of FIDReC. Because in the, I think in the Bear FI situation, FIDReC stepped in. So does FIDReC get involved if it's an investment platform, or is it only if it's a financial institution?
So at FIDReC, the financial institutions that are obliged to subscribe to us, they range from banks, life insurers, general insurers, capital market services licensees, which will include many of these, investment firms, as well as financial advisors and insurance brokers. So the financial advisory firms can be small ones, or they can be big ones that are tied to established names. So there is quite a big range of financial institutions. And to check whether yours is covered, please go to the FIDReC website for the full list.
Thanks, Eunice. I mean, that's good to know, because most people, when they hear of financial institutions, instinctively think of banks. They don't really consider, as you said, insurance companies or financial advisors. So I think this leads on to another question from another audience member. Is it only banks and financial advisors that must be licensed under MAS?
The answer is no. I wonder if Francis wants to address that because it's more legal.
Sure.
Okay, so basically, let's flip the question around to a broader scheme, okay? It's not so much whether you are classified as a bank or whatever, but flip it around. If you want to carry out financial activity in Singapore that falls in the nature of securities, issue of debentures, then you would need to get a license from the MAS. All right. And on that score, it will be interesting to note that cryptocurrencies do not generally fall under regulated activity unless MAS deems them to be in the nature of securities. So this entire thing about what is a definition and whether you're regulated is really quite a confusing and complex area. But for you as an investor, the guideline or the guidance is simple. If you are dealing with an entity, check first of all whether they are listed on any of those websites that Eunice has talked about, because it's not so much of whether they're regulated or not regulated. You really want to find out whether there's anything in these entities that you should be alerted to or be aware of. And then you stand guided by that to make your investment decision accordingly.
Thanks, Francis. We received a question from an audience member that, after the adjudicator has made a decision, is it final? Can you still go to court or seek other remedies?
For the adjudicator's decision, it is final for the purpose of the FIDReC process, meaning that at FIDReC, there is no appeal and there is no review. We are a very simple, cost-effective process. But if the consumer wants to pursue the case in court, then because FIDReC process is a private confidential process, and in our terms of reference, it is made clear that the decision is not binding on the consumer can still go to court, and the financial institution cannot use the adjudicator's decision to say, oh, adjudicator decided like that, the court, you should follow suit. In fact, the adjudicator's decision is also one of the confidential documents in the FIDReC process. We do not share a copy with either the financial institution or the complainant, but in fact, the decision will be read out to both parties at a formal session. And so the consumer can be assured that whatever happens in FIDReC will not, be prejudicial or affect his or her legal right in any way.
Thanks, Eunice. And I think it's assuring to know that the adjudicator's, decision is confidential. So it can't be a case where the bank goes to court, if it does go to court, and brings up that what has been disclosed or discussed during mediation or adjudication. So one audience member had a question. You raised the topic about adjudication versus mediation. Are you able to share what's the chances of success for adjudication versus mediation? I guess maybe the audience member thinking which route is more likely to succeed.
I will answer first based on the statistics, and then
Sure.
I will share some views. So based on the statistics at FIDReC, about 50 to 60% of cases that go to mediation result in a settlement agreement. Okay, but this also means that there is a large percentage of cases that do not result in a settlement agreement. But we can still close the case at mediation because the consumer chooses not to take the case to adjudication. For adjudication, I shared the statistics over the years. The chances, so to speak, of the adjudicator making an award is between 8 to 20% of the cases. Okay, but that being said, let me just explain that what is winning is different in mediation and adjudication, right? At adjudication, winning is whether or not the adjudicator is persuaded that you have a valid claim, right? The adjudicator may make a full award, meaning they award you the full sum that you have claimed, or just a portion of the sum that you have claimed. And so this is completely in the hands of the adjudicator. Your role is just to try and gather up all your evidence and make your submission, present your case to explain what is the wrongdoing that the financial institution has done. Whereas at mediation, winning is different, right? You have a say, because if you can enter into a settlement agreement, this means that both the consumer and the financial institution have agreed on a way forward. So both of them actually come to an agreement, and this is where you have control, right? It is in your hands whether you want to agree and how you agree. And at FIDReC, our case managers will encourage you to consider multiple options. You might come in thinking all or nothing, right? But we will ask you to consider other possible options, right? We will invite you to think about various facts and documents, what they might mean for you. But again, ultimately, it is the choice of the parties mediation. So I would say, the statistics do paint a certain picture, but case by case, you will have to, be aware of those special facts of your own case and what is best for you.
Thanks, Eunice. I think along these lines, someone has asked if, we applied to FIDReC, we tried mediation, it failed. Could they, maybe after a couple of weeks or months, come back to FIDReC again and say, okay, let's go for adjudication?
Okay. So what happens if the mediation doesn't lead to a settlement is that we will offer the consumer a chance to go to adjudication, and we will ask the consumer to make that decision within a certain period of time, right? At first, we will say within 2 weeks, right? But if you ask for more time, and give us some explanation of why you need a bit more time, we can extend that time. But if you do not respond to us and we send you follow-ups and reminders, we might then close your case, right? And we will notify you that we have closed your case. But we do have, the exceptional cases that come back a bit later, and they have a very good reason. So, for example, somebody actually had a cardiac arrest and was hospitalized,
Yes,
was
that's a
in no
good reason.
condition to respond to our emails, and so we allowed them to continue. But I think that in order to be fair to both parties, we cannot allow, consumers to reopen cases without good reason. Yeah.
Thanks, Eunice. So I think to the audience member who asked that question, FIDReC will follow up. So do comply within the timelines, because I think everyone wants certainty on whether the matter is closed or whether you'd like to pursue the matter further. So I'm afraid that I have to bring this webinar to a close and would like to thank Eunice and Francis for sharing their expertise with us. After this webinar ends, a feedback form will be shown in your browser for your completion. We appreciate if you could just take a couple of minutes to complete the form so that we can improve our webinars. With that, thank you for joining us today and have a pleasant week ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Serene. Thank you, Francis.
Yes, thank you. Right.